Thank you. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I received a diagnosis of what back then was called Asperger's syndrome. It was about 25 years ago. At that time, I thought I got it late. Now I think I was very young, because I'm 53 now. I don't meet any of the criteria for autism anymore. And actually, I don't think I had autism. I think I had something very similar to autism. And I will just leave that as a cliffhanger, and I will get back to that later. This experience with the diagnosis led me into working in the autism field because I found it very fascinating, and I still do. So I have now, as was mentioned, worked for about 20 years as a staff counselor, among other things, and educator. And I have been keeping on writing books. And the last one, Secret to Success for Professionals in the Autism Field, is the last one in English, and that's the one I will be talking about. You could say, it's the experience I made as a staff counselor. And when I reviewed coming here, the title of my presentation, I was thinking now, maybe I won't tell you what the most important tools are and how to use them. I will tell you something, some of the important tools, and maybe more of why to use them, or that we should use them. And I wrote in the short text about my presentation that I might not tell you something new, but I hope I will tell you some old things maybe in a new way. Because what I see is we have lots of knowledge of autism today in my country, in Sweden, but we don't always do or practice that knowledge. In Sweden we say we are a consensus culture. We want to agree on everything. The typical Swedish staff meeting is that we sit together and discuss at length what intervention or what tool we should use, and we can't stop discuss until everyone agrees. And then we agree on using this, and then nobody does that. I'm not saying this happens all the time, but too often it does. So as a staff counselor, I actually became interested in developing professionalism, because I think everybody who is professional wants to develop their professionalism. Okay, so I noticed that lots of staff has lots of theoretical knowledge, but they don't know how to put that into practice. And I realized that sometimes it is because they don't know how, but sometimes, or even more often, it's because they don't know why. And if you don't know why, you tend to just not do it. My point here is that working in the autism field, being a professional in the autism field, is much like any craftsmanship. Because first of all, if you're a craftsman, you need to understand the importance of the preparatory work that you have to prepare for your work. As a comparison, if you have a painter probably don't spend even half of their time actually painting. A painter will start by covering the surfaces to make sure he or she doesn't spill anything. And then perhaps removing old paint, sanding, putty, and so on, and then paint. And the end result is very dependent on how well you do your preparations. And my picture in autism is that many staff I meet, they rather run around and try to rescue things that went wrong after the fact than prepare for things that could happen. So I think that's an important tool, actually, one of the most important tools to do your preparatory work. I can't even translate or say that in English, I'm sorry. The other thing we need, just like a craftsman, we need a toolbox with several tools. And some tools are mandatory if you work in autism. And some tools you can choose to have, depending on the level of disability your client or student has, your profession, etc. One of the most known mandatory tool, I would say, is to use visual aids. Everybody knows that if we work in the autism field, we should use visual aids, right? Such as pictures, symbols, drawings, text even, for those who can read. Still, what I see, especially when it comes to clients with autism who don't have a learning disability, this is not used often enough. And it's rarely a question of staff not knowing how, it's that they don't know why. So let's make the connection between the theory and the practice. Because everybody knows about theory of mind, right? Everybody is here, I'm sure. Still, I meet staff, even if they know everything theoretical about the problems that you can have with theory of mind or mentalization when you have autism, they can be upset over a person with autism behaving in a certain way, in a certain situation. For example, when a person with autism who just flatly denies having done something that's obvious to everybody. So let me tell you about an example from my son. My son does not have autism. And when he was 3 years old, we were out in the garden and he went inside and he didn't come out again, so I went inside looking for him, calling him, he didn't answer. And I looked around and then I saw that there was a package of cookies open and I saw crumbles on the floor, so I just followed the crumbles and I found my son with his mouth full of cookies behind the sofa. And I asked him, it was a rather stupid question actually, but I asked him, did you take cookies? And he said, no, with the mouth full of cookies. I was not upset because he was 3 years old. So why should I be upset? He can't see the situation from my perspective, right? What I realized was just about a year later, when he was 4, those situations did not happen anymore. It's not that he just became very compliant and never did anything he shouldn't, certainly not. But if I caught him doing something he shouldn't have done, he would not just flatly deny, he would start arguing with me. And to argue, of course, you need a language, but not just a language. You also need the development of theory of mind, to take someone else's perspective and think, what argument may this person, my mother in this case, buy into? So he would say things like, I was so hungry and you weren't here, so I couldn't ask. What I see in staff who work in autism is that although they know that theory of mind, the development is delayed in many individuals with autism, not to say that you can't develop theory of mind if you have autism, but it's often delayed. I still see them becoming upset when, say, a student, 15 years old, in a regular school with autism would flatly deny having done something that everybody else knows he has done. To me, he or she, that student, is just 3 years old in that respect, not 3 years old all over, but in this area. So there's no need for becoming upset. However gifted this person is otherwise. Of course, to flatly deny something doesn't mean you have autism. Actually, a very famous denial is, I did not have sexual relationships with that woman. Bill Clinton. And I don't think he has troubles with theory of mind, of course. But the thing is that when when we are under a lot of pressure, we lose our mature strategies, right? So, but that's another thing. I'm talking here about people with autism who hasn't developed those strategies yet. I think theory of mind is actually crucial to and its development is crucial because it steers so much of what we do. It steers our behaviors, especially the second stage of theory of mind, where you could see yourself from other people's perspective. Because when I work with challenging behavior, as I often do, I actually think that all small children are just all, let's say, standard developed small children are walking challenging behaviors, right? A 1-year-old. So it's quite normal phase in development to kick someone if you're in a bad mood or whatever. And all small children have behaviors like every little child I've ever known has picked their nose. And we don't like that if we're adults, so we tell them not to pick their nose. And they can maybe obey us when we tell them not to, but they have no inner motivation for not picking their nose until a certain development stage, I would say, and that would be the theory of mind, where you can see yourself from another person's perspective and realize that they think this is gross, and then you have a motivation to not do it. So whenever we see what people might call odd behaviors in autism or challenging behaviors, I think you can just look at it from a developmental perspective and not be upset, really, if you know the developmental challenges that are there in autism. So very often when I counsel in services for high-functioning people with autism, I hear staff saying when something's happened, the person has behaved in a certain way, staff will tell the person with autism, you must understand that, and you can fill in whatever. You can't behave like this in this setting or whatever. But the thing is, the person does not understand that, and we can't just use nagging as a way of helping a person develop in that area. So let's go to the toolbox and immediately remove that nagging tool. Because I think, I will tell you that as a parent, I have done lots of stupid things that I don't believe in, such as nagging, for example, but that's okay, because it's not a professional relationship. It's a relationship built on love, and it's lifelong, right? But as professionals, we can't afford that. So if we're professionals, we have to have a professional toolkit, and nagging is not a part of that. As a matter of fact, when I talked about what we can afford, I would like to give you a picture in your head that you can use as a tool. I think that we must have a trust account with our clients with autism, whether they're students or what we call them in our setting. When the client has autism, we have to keep that account in balance, because if we overdraw this account, the person with autism might just not want to have anything to do with us. So once that happens, we can't help them, right? To help someone, you have to have their trust. Since I always know that as a professional, I will make mistakes. I will sometimes even offend someone with autism. Not willingly, but things happen, and it's hard, even if I try to be prepared, to always be prepared for everything. So knowing that, I think that I have to put as many deposits as possible in that trust account, so I can afford to just do a withdrawal now and then without overdrawing the account. So that's a picture I have when I work as a tool in my head, when I meet clients with autism. So deliberately working on the relationship, making savings in the trust account is a tool to have in your toolbox. And how do we do that? Well, and this is extra important if we have clients with challenging behaviors, because we have to give the person as much possibility as possible to influence their own situation and even influence us our work, how we approach this person. You know, there is an awful saying. It goes like this: give him an inch and he'll take a mile. My experience is rather, offer him a mile and he'll only need an inch. And that's something I think you can also use as a staff, because I meet staff who are afraid of just letting go too much or giving the person too much power over things. I don't think you have to be afraid of that. Back then to the use of visual aids. We need them, of course, and we know that, to compensate for the difficulties the person has with theory of mind and other difficulties, of course. With the help of, for example, drawings like comic strip conversations and such, we can explain other people's perspectives to the person with autism. But watch out. Since it's a powerful tool, we need to have ethics here. With tools, we can steer and control people with autism. And that is not our assignment, that's not our job, despite that we do that ever so often. So let me tell you a story. It's about a man with autism and Down syndrome. He has both. He one day came up with a fantastic idea that he wanted to have a haircut with, you know, a mohawk, a green one, big like that. And the staff, he was living in a group home, and the staff would tell him things like, you wouldn't look so good in that. I think another haircut would suit you better. What they meant was you might get in trouble with such a haircut, having Down syndrome and maybe being perceived as different. So I'll give you another tool for your toolbox. I call this tool informed decisions. We let the individual decide, but we are the ones to give the person enough information to make that decision. We give the person ideas of possible outcomes that some might be upset, some might call him names or being afraid of him out in town, some might think it's cool, right? Too. So then the person decides if he or she is willing to take the risk. We need to take risks as human beings, whether you have autism or not, because that's how we grow. Sometimes we fail or make mistakes when we take risks, but we can't learn and grow from failure if we don't take any risks at all. So a pitfall for staff is absolutely that they think they know what is best for their client or student. I hear this from staff all the time. We need to look out for this because this is a human mechanism. We all have it. It's one that we have as parents. We think we know what's best for our children. When they are newly born, we have to know what's best for them. But later on, our children normally shows us that we don't know always what's best for them. So the problem is that our clients with autism or students with autism may awaken that feeling, that parental feeling in us, because we see the need for help in situation. But we have to be aware of that mechanism and realize that we don't know what's best for them. You might argue sometimes that they don't either know always what's best for them, and that's sometimes true, but giving them the options, they can find out. Another example. We had a woman, she had high-functioning autism and she was 19 years old. And she was good in writing, and she had a blog on animal rights with quite a few visitors because it's a subject that many people are interested in. One day she told the staff that she just came up with a brilliant idea of she was going to post a picture naked of herself on her animal rights blog. So the staff was quite concerned about this because even if she's an adult, she was 19 years old, she felt like not very emotionally mature, maybe more like a 14 or 15-year-old. But still, she's an adult in the meaning of the law, so we can't tell her that she can't do that, even if my experience is that staff want to do that. What we did was by drawing pictures and talking to her, giving her examples of outcomes, both positives and negatives, that could happen. She could get comments, maybe not so nice comments about her looks. She could also get nice comments. Nobody knows. We gave her these ideas of what could happen. And then actually she decided to do this. She posted this picture. And both things happened, some nice comments and some not so nice comments on this picture. She took it down after a week, and she had made an experience, actually. Something she learned something from. And I think that many times we as staff just are not letting people with autism make their own mistakes. So the informed information, the informed choices is a tool we have to use to help people make informed decisions. Sorry. We have two tools here, not only the informed decision tool, we also have the professional reflection tool. That tool has to be used every day. With reflection, we can grow as professionals. We have to question ourselves and our rationale, why are we doing this? And we have to question our agenda, maybe we say. I want to give you another example. In Sweden, I told you of a typical staff meeting. One thing I didn't tell you about a typical staff meeting is that we always have coffee. That is just so. And some people like to take milk in their coffee, right? And if there's not milk in their coffee, for the coffee, it's not just good with coffee, and it's not a good meeting. This was a service, a leisure service for young adults with autism. And in this service, they had a little staff meeting before the teenagers with autism would arrive. And at this staff meeting, the staff realized they were out of milk. And they only had a short time for the meeting, but the people who wanted milk in their coffee thought that this was so important that they took the time to just go and take the car and go and buy milk for the coffee, right? And then come the teenagers with autism, and then they go out in the woods to grill some hot dogs out in the woods, and they realize that they forgotten the ketchup for the hot dogs, and these teenagers are very upset. They don't want hot dogs if there's no ketchup to go with the hot dogs. And then staff says, well, they have such a problem with changes, and it's good for them to really practice on this, that not everything can go as planned. Just take a second and think if this could happen in your settings as well. I think it could. I think it could happen in almost every setting. And I think the tool we have for this is the reflection tool. What do we do? How do we view? Is there a we and them, right? Of course, there is an actual we and them. If we're staff, that's one kind of we. But we don't have to just make this we and them bigger, really. So we can look at how we reason about our clients or students. There are, of course, other reasons to use visual aids. As you know, people with autism often have problems with communication and language processing. We all know that. Still, I see often that staff don't understand when the person actually speaks well that they need visual aids anyway. So in my experience, I meet a lot of people with autism who speak well, but still don't understand as well language as they speak. And I would say that there is actually a kind of echolalia even in high-functioning autism. That is that you learn phrases and you use them. So a young person I knew with autism, she had 3 phrases she would use in social interaction. So one was, wow. It works for most. If someone says something, you can say, wow. And one was, we used that expression in Swedish maybe 15, 20 years ago, but she still uses it, and it's, how was that on a scale from 1 to 10? Okay. And then she had another very typical Swedish expression. It's that people in the north of Sweden tend to say that. Well, so she had these three, and it worked out well for her in most situations, actually. She would just toss in one of these, and people perceived her as very social. And anyway, one morning, she was 17. On her way to school, she met a classmate, and this classmate was crying and told her that her grandmother had died. She had just found out that, and she was very sad. So this woman with autism said, wow, and then she realized, no, that's not a good expression, and she said, and how was this on a scale from 1 to 10? Okay, so after this huge social mistake, she was devastated that she had made such a mistake. And she would actually dwell on this with us in her surroundings a lot. And that's one thing. People, staff I meet who work with teenagers or young adults with autism, they say to me that they tend to dwell on things that has happened, and they tend to persevere on this, and they just go on and on. But actually, I think you in the audience who don't have autism, some have autism, but some of you don't, have you made social mistakes? Of course, you can't become a grown-up without doing that. Did you dwell on them? Sure you did. I think most people actually, how could I said that? And like everybody else has forgotten this, but you still remember how awkward you feel about having made this mistake. So I think people with autism are no different in many aspects from people who don't have autism. So it's the same mechanism. We tend to dwell on social mistakes. And when people have offended us, we also dwell on that. And so do people with autism. So yeah, nothing strange about that. I don't have so much more time. I will not, I promised I wouldn't go over my time for the next speaker. So I just want to give you maybe a couple of other tools. I think one tool that I have learned to use, I call it transparent communication. Because I think my experience is that people with autism actually pick up and react very much to the unspoken. So if I am very nervous, but I don't want to show that I'm nervous, then they will feel, as will other people too, but my experience is that actually people with autism tend to feel and react to this more than other people. Then they will react to this. So I've learned this transparent communication is just to tell them I'm quite nervous. I did that when I was going to meet a man who was, had a very severe challenging behavior. Actually, he was locked up in a clinic with the highest security in Sweden where you normally put murderers. And when I came there to meet him, the staff just gave me an alarm in my hand, and they just said, push this button if something happens. And at that moment, I became very nervous, actually. And I went into the room alone with this man. So I told him, actually, this is what they gave me and what they said. Now I'm very nervous. And he said, relax, I've never hit a woman. So, okay, I relaxed a little bit. But the point here is I think it's a good idea to just tell them what's going on. So if you're very tired or upset or irritated, it will show. But the person with autism might not, of course, be that good at guessing why. And maybe you don't have to explain why, but tell them that you can do this. And another part of the transparent communication, because that's a question I have gotten from staff who say they feel hijacked by people with autism sometimes, who want to talk about their interests for hours and hours. And I know psychologists who felt awful because she actually fell asleep. And I always think, as a professional, one important part of being professional is knowing when you are at risk of losing your professionality and how to maintain it, right? So if I think that I might become very tired or irritated, because that can happen even if I'm a professional. If someone talks to me 3 hours about airplanes, it can happen. But then I have to act before that happens, right? So I actually do interrupt people with autism sometimes. But then I tell them I do that. That's transparent communication. I'm saying, I'm interrupting you now because, and I tell them why. We need to talk about this, or if we go on, I might fall asleep, or whatever. So we can come back to this later. So this is also part of the professionality. And then another tool that I think is useful, it has been very useful for me anyway, it's the solution-focused strategies. And solution-focused, it's often under the name of solution-focused therapy, SFT, but it's just like, let's say it's a toolkit. It's not specifically for autism. So if you work with people with autism, you have to adapt it. But especially in working with staff, I find it very useful. Because we can backtrack things from another perspective with staff. I meet staff who say, well, they have a client that is very difficult with severe challenging behavior, and they say nothing works. And it's so difficult, and okay, but we have to start somewhere. And they are so used to looking at what does not work. So with the solution-focused strategies, we look at what do work. When does it work? Even if it just works once a month for 2 seconds, what's the conditions during that time? Who is present? So we can, I'm not saying we shouldn't look at the difficulties and the problems, but we also need this way of looking at why does it work, when it works, and how can we do more of that. So that is actually a tool set that I am very happy that it came into my life. It's helped me a lot, counseling staff and meeting people with autism. For example, I used it with a young man with autism who had lived in a care setting, and he was this kind of person that you sometimes meet with autism. Not everybody is like that, but he was totally negative about everything. If he said something, it was always something negative. And the staff was not good, and the food was not good, and nothing was good. Still, the staff saw he was making progress, but it was difficult. Of course, it's difficult at staff if the person always tells you everything is, you see progress, but the person doesn't see it himself. So when he was leaving that setting, actually positively to live more independently, I had a talk with him because I knew him, and I used the solution-focused some strategies to ask him what would he, this is actually the scale from 0 to 10, so I asked him where would he put this time, and he said an 8. I was shocked. An 8, really, that was. And then we just talked about what made it an 8, what was good, and then he could put it into words for the first time. So it's a good toolkit. Okay, so I just have a few minutes left, and I have to pick up my cliffhanger. I promised you that. What did I have? Well, I told you my son does not have autism. He had actually, I watched him because I know autism, so he had no traits whatsoever, I would say, of autism or of ADHD or any other neuropsychiatric disorder until he was 8 years old, when he suddenly, during the course of 2 weeks, would fulfill diagnostic criteria for 5 psychiatric illnesses, including psychosis. At an 8-year-old. It was devastating and difficult to see. And as a mother, I finally, by myself, found out that this was a disorder called PANDAS, pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with streptococci infection. And my son is now, thank you, treated, and he's symptom-free since 3 years, but he was ill for 2 years, and he is back to his old self now. I realized I had a severe scarlet fever, which is streptococci infection at 2.5. And I think I had PANDAS, now that I know so much about PANDAS. And I think there is an overlap between autism and PANDAS. Can't tell you because it's not researched yet how many, but there is. You can have autism first and you can get PANDAS on top of it, which happens to some. Usually then it's severe OCD or it's hallucinations or something like that that will add on. Or you can have nothing first and then get PANDAS, and if it's not treated and you get it as a young person, it may, in almost everything, look like autism or be autism. I'm not sure what autism is really anymore. What I am sure of is that with all the new knowledge of how the immune system play a role in all psychiatry, not just neuropsychiatry, I think these fields must come together. Yeah, I think some do only have autism or only PANDAS, some have right diagnosis, some have the wrong diagnosis, I'm not sure. Of course, the important thing is that person get access to the right help. But I'm also absolutely want to be clear with that, sure that there are people with autism who don't have PANDAS, so I don't think everything is PANDAS. But I think I had it. And I don't have more time to explain this to you. And I know some of you have heard of PANDAS before. For others, it might be totally new. But then you have your best friend Google, right? So you can look for PANDAS. And you don't want to look at the Asian bears. You want to look at PANDAS together with streptococci, or maybe together with the name Susan Swedo, the American doctor who discovered this in the 90s. So maybe I have to write a new autobiography. The facts are still there. I experienced it like this, but maybe it wasn't autism, but it could have been PANDAS. I think so. So I will now leave room for the next speaker. Thank you.